Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Cure. I'm Seema Kumar. I'm the CEO of this beautiful facility. I don't know how many of you have been here to Cure or taken a tour of Cure. You probably are seeing this conference center, but in this building, we have wet labs, dry labs, an incubation facility, and we have many companies from startups all the way to companies that have gone public from this ecosystem, all in this across the healthcare ecosystem. And so I just wanted to mention that you're sitting in this facility where probably everybody's off today. I hope everybody's off, but in this building happens a lot of work, and that's really the heart and soul of Cure. And Cure also is not just a physical building, it also is, I'm gonna try to find the clicker here. It's not just a physical building, but we also have a digital infrastructure/hub, where through our membership program, what we do is really offer a whole host of things for entrepreneurs. Because for us, entrepreneurs really are, what we're focused on. They can be from academia, they can be a biotech, they can be a physician who suddenly decided that they want to change the world. Whoever they are, we're in service of those entrepreneurs. And we appreciate their courage and also their ability to take this very difficult journey, this obstacle course, to go through and take a discovery that's made in the lab, translate it and take it all the way to patients and to really create a healthy, happy life for people. That's why our name, our brand, what we call ourselves is Cure period. And that's because we are actually envisioning a world without disease where cures are aplenty and that people can reliably and consistently translate breakthroughs that we are investing in and day out and turn them into cures. And so that's really where we come from. And we don't do those discoveries ourselves, but we enable those who do go through this journey. And as part of that, we always talk about capital as being a big thing that really limits that translational pathway. And capital and funding is one, definitely a criterion. But even more than that, the ability to understand what it takes to take something that is really a phenomenal breakthrough, to create a clinically validated asset that then goes into venture, becomes a company, and then is acquired by a pharmaceutical company that then scales and then is launched in the market, approved and launched in the market, is something that we don't think everybody understands that full pathway and how to navigate that. And so part of our educational courses, our curriculum, our expert office hours, our networking, and all of that is designed to do that. But beyond that, we also just recently got into the whole intelligence work. And that's what I'm going to talk about mostly today, and that is the Cure Innovation Index. And we started the journey of the Cure Innovation Index about, I would say, a year and a half ago. And it all stemmed from this very interesting question that, I personally have experienced in my own life, and I think that we see all the time, which is why do two equally prestigious, excellent universities/biomedical research institutions have so different outcomes when it comes to translation? Why are some focused on research excellence only, and why are others just, consistently and reliably doing this translation? What is it that makes that happen? And we began that journey, and partly, that was always a curiosity question. But beyond just being a curiosity question, at this point in time, we are in the United States at an inflection point where it's no longer enough to just do breakthrough discoveries, but to really ensure that they are translated into human impact. And so when we looked at federal you can look at it from a patient impact perspective because that is why we do sometimes science, especially biomedical science. But beyond that, the translational performance now becomes like a key critical aspect of a lot of things that universities are dealing with, including funding from federal sources are increasingly focused on translation. And boards and donors, the provosts and trustees of universities are saying, okay, this is phenomenal, but what about the translation piece? Industry and VC, they're now even more so risk averse when it comes to very early stage research, and they're looking for clinically validated targets. And so that's why when Joni Ritter speaks, I think it's going to be a very important conversation, and I'm glad that she's doing the keynote, because the ability to do those clinical trials here in the United States, especially phase 1, phase 2, is going to be critically important. And I'll show you some data that we found from the Innovation Index that's very interesting. And of course, global competition. We were at Bio in San Diego about 2 weeks ago in the middle of June. And we had done some work to compare US and China in terms of competition. And it's not about us versus China. At the end of the day, really, we are all, as a global community, against one thing, and the one thing is disease. We all want to eliminate disease. That said, one of the things that everybody's concerned about is the US complacency. It's not just China's getting ahead. It's more like, hey, let that be a wake-up call for the United States. And so with that, we looked at the scorecard. And it was like a tale of two cities. It was, and because the FIFA fever was still going on, and the Knicks had just won, we decided to do very, very rigorous intellectual work, but we also showcased it in the form of a scorecard. And so when you looked at the scorecard, and I'll talk a little bit about that, but that global competition becomes really important. And then back to, this is why translational science is, key. And so what we did in this Cure Innovation Index was when we looked at the question of what distinguishes the universities or biomedical research institutions that consistently are focused on translation, we gathered up a series of experts, internal and external, together to explore this question. And we had a whole host of ideas, everything from culture to leadership to infrastructure to what have you. And we had about 54 different indicators that we all thought could potentially be responsible for doing this. And when we looked at all of the data, we gathered up data from about, I would say like 12 plus federal and other databases, plus we conducted an audit and a survey. And as we began looking at this and studied the correlation, we found that there were 25 indicators that strongly correlated with translational performance. And they were upstream. And it wasn't about startups. It wasn't about the revenue generated from patents alone. It had to do with much more upstream things like having access to core labs, having a TTO office that actually not just focuses on licensing or patenting, but actually has industry connections to help make those connections for faculty. And we also looked at multiple other things like clinical trials per $10 million of NIH spend to really see how much of the NIH spend is going towards basic versus clinical, and then how many of those clinical trials are interventional trials of the whole total trial. So we looked at multiple indicators, and where we ended up with, so out of a universe of 6,000, we ended up with 303 institutions across the United States that are doing work in translation. So you had to actually have $10 million of spend for 3 consecutive years to be included in this. So with all that, where did we end up with? Who topped the rankings? And this, we're going to do this on an annual basis, so this list might change. Harvard, Stanford, UPenn, MIT, UC San Francisco, and then you had top institutes and centers. We separated them into 2 lists because there were some that are specific independent research institutions. So you had all of this. So MIT, you'll see, 31st in research capabilities. Obviously, they don't even have a medical college. They're technology school. They're not even a biology school yet. They scored 2nd in market translation. And Cleveland Clinic, 6th overall is tied for #1 in entrepreneurial readiness. And so with all this, there were a few that were surprises, punching above their weight. University of Indiana, for example, surprise, surprise, it was much higher. So I'll go through the next 2-3 things very quickly. But what is interesting is when you look at a university and you look through the data, so each university can access their own data. It's behind a platform in which it gives you diagnostics, where you stand, peer benchmarking, solutions, et cetera. But you can look across the US ecosystem. And one of the things that you see when you look at it across the ecosystem is 64-1, this particular ratio, right? So 67% of all phase 1-2 trials are run out of 62 out of the 243 institutions. The rest are not doing, and so those are the CTSA-network. So these are the universities that have the CTSA. So if you look at it this way, look at the non-CTSA and CTSA universities. So, same x-axis, different y-axis. The CTS, 64 of the 243 are doing all of the clinical trials, phase 1-2. And what is interesting, and you don't see this here, is that the ones that are doing the frontier research are the ones that are not doing the clinical trials. And one more thing I'll mention is this. I know that we're I don't know how much time I have, so I'll go fast. So where do cures get stuck? So when we did the audit of about 3,400 or so researchers across these universities, we discovered 3 things where things get stuck. So #1 is the industry connections. So only 28% said that their TTO office actually helps them with industry connections. And so that was like one of the biggest bottlenecks, is not having those connections. Second one was seed funding. And that is whether it's gap funding or funding for proof of concept and your first clinicals. And finally, commercialization training. So how do I go? It's not only does my university not provide commercialization training, where the hell do I go to get this training? How do I find out? Is there any specific curriculum, courses, et cetera? And so, and I won't go through these, but it's really what is clear is that academic innovation is seen as very, very, very important. So industry thinks it's really, so it has a stake in making sure that this happens, because industry does not invest in early research. They're hoping that all the de-risked work will come out of these places. Used to be that they had their own internal REDs and this, that, and the other, but even now, those research and early development units are getting, little by little downsized. And so they are de-risking early science. They provide talent and expertise, and they are an early stage economic engine. And so this is really, again, some interesting information about what industry thinks makes an institution strong. And so this entrepreneurial culture and ecosystem is #1. And then when industry goes and looks at acquiring or collaborating, what do they look for most? Entrepreneurial culture, as I said, but flexible IP policies and the faculty engagement. So I'm going to really do one more slide, and then we can wrap up. It's just to set context. So if you take this industry response and look at it, they are most interested in like the partnership and collaboration model, and that's where they would improve the most, because there is a feeling like universities and others, early stage researchers, are very closed and protective and not really willing to be open and collaborate. And this is the core team that worked on it, combination of internal and external experts, including several people who are from not just here, but around the country, and data analysts and others who consulted with us on this. And Here's really a picture of what the United States ecosystem looks like. It's not just a ranking, it's an intelligence platform, and you'll see clearly some big hotspots that are there. And inside the platform, what a university TTO office or the president or the provost see is how their institution is ranked against a peer cohort. So Springfield University is a made-up university. It's just to mock up without showing any university's data. We didn't want to do that. So with that, let me stop here and say, feel free to go explore the Innovation Index. And the reason for talking about this mostly has to do with the fact that we believe translation is important. We want to measure it. One of the biggest pieces of complete eye-opening insight was that there is no standard way to measure what good looks like in this arena. This is a first time. We've talked to almost every single one of the folks on this list, and each one has a different methodology for how they measure success. So there is no standardized way to measure it. So with that, I don't want to go too much over. I think I've gone over my time, but if there's any question, I'm happy to answer. Yes.
Testing.
Hi, I'm just curious about whether in the efforts to create the index, you saw examples maybe outside of Harvard, Stanford, MIT, where the business school was involved.
Yes, definitely. Many places have the business schools involved. So that actually is a big predictor of how much entrepreneurial education there is. So for example, there are places that offer MD, PhD, MBA programs, PhD, MBA programs. One particular institution that stood out is University of South Florida, right? It's South Florida, correct? And that's because you would think, what, why? Because they actually have a business school run entrepreneurship center. So it's almost like that is completely and fully focused on entrepreneurial education. And so you would think, wait, where did they come from? And that's what it was. And there's also lots, and the other thing I will say is those that have the clinical trials, they're part of the CTSA hub, which Joni will be talking about, or they're part of the BIOS network. They're able to do a lot more capital raising venture relationships than others are. Thank you. Yes, one more. Okay. Happy to take that, or we can. Yeah. Okay. One more.
Korkut Uygun, Mass General, and Harvard. So thank you. That will help.
Yes.
I very much share the pain on the TTO offices.
Yeah.
They really operate as compliance officers sometimes.
Yeah.
I have a question. The index is amazing because this is actionable dynamic data, not lagging indicators.
Correct.
Is there any uptake on the spot from the funding agencies to use them? And the second question is there any possibility to extend this to evaluating the researchers themselves? Because we have the exact same problem.
Yep.
H indexes and citations are very lagging indicators.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, yes, that is a corollary to this thing because there's two parts to that. So first of all, speaking of NIH, I think Dr. Jay Bhattacharya, who I think you guys were going to try to get here, I think he now is doing two jobs, right? Both overseeing the CDC and the NIH. He believes truly in translational research, but I think that the mechanics and of the whole appropriations and how to actually make it all happen is being more difficult than we thought. Number one. Number two, I think that ARPA-H is doing a lot. They just announced some other big new initiative. So I think that ARPA-H is very much interested in this data. And we are an ARPA-H innovator catalyst hub and a community hub. So we do plan to work with them to do more, as well as with not overall NIH, but NCATS maybe to look at because clinical trials is where we're getting like, we scored 0 to 7 versus China. So, clinical trials is where we need to modernize the infrastructure. We need to the whole thing needs revamping. Your other question on researchers, yes, we want to do that. But it's also interesting because there are many universities that build incubation centers and all accelerators on campus, but they are sometimes not utilized. So without the faculty being engaged in that, if the faculty is going off and doing their own thing, which like if you're a Langer or you're a Carolyn Bertozzi or you're a George Church, you don't need anything. You just kind of like go, but then you're not incorporated into the system. And so that becomes like sort of a one-off rather than being consistent and reliable. So yes, the answer is yes. Thank you.